I have a problem. I hate the feeling of having nothing to do. And I don't mean having an open schedule where I can do whatever I want. I mean having that time and not wanting to do anything. There are endless videos on burnout, but that's not what this is. The lack of motivation can come from dozens of different sources, and the flavor is different for everyone. What led me to this point is only half the puzzle. So then what am I supposed to do if I don't feel like doing anything, but I don't like the feeling of not doing anything? Well, this. Let me explain. Searching specifically for motivation is already starting off a little bit on the wrong foot. It's not wrong to want to be motivated, of course not, but it's not something tangible, it's a state of being. And so I have a theory. All the times in my life that I've gone from no motivation to fully motivated have one thing in common, which is the process. Something happens when I somehow trick myself into starting, and it always ends up being unexpected. And so I wanted to test this theory as best as I could. And I promise that the final piece is worth it, but it's what happened during the creation of this piece that holds the key to answering our golden question here. For this to all make sense though, we need to start a little bit in the middle. So recently, I've been not super inspired to make anything, but I found this artist on Instagram that has piqued my interest in his visuals. So his name's Christoph. He's a fantastic artist. He does this sort of halftone, stipple dot type texture pieces, especially with portraits. So what I want to see is if I can recreate some of the compositions that he has, but while also tying it into some shots like these ones that I found on Pinterest, and just make a whole sequence out of it. Additionally, it reminded me of Gorillaz and their Demon Days album cover with the 4 heads, which is super iconic at this point. So I'm gonna see if I can package all of this into one animated sequence, but more importantly, just running with this because it's the thing that is actually interesting me to create. And yeah, I'm just gonna run with it and see where we go from there. The one I'm gonna try and recreate is this one. And hopefully me in front of the dark background should work for cutting out, but yeah, let's see. So the problem I think I have with the shot is that you can't really see where the back of my head ends and the start of the background begins. I won't be able to cut myself out. So I'm gonna use this and set it up on a little clamp here and use this as a hair light to help define the back. I think that should work enough to help separate me from the background. Boom, set up. Now we zoom in. So I've been doing some testing over the last hour. The first method I tried is with this plugin from Robyte called Stipple. It just generates a bunch of dots based on the footage below it. So that works really well for this. Yeah, the whole point is that this is going in the right direction. I think it really is true though that just starting is the hardest part. And then once you get going and once you're in the flow, it becomes a lot easier. So I'm gonna actually get this animated now and start moving on to recording some of the other shots. I want to talk a little bit about the idea of distraction as a sort of creative reboot, which is basically the idea that the best thing to do when you're feeling demotivated is something else entirely without expecting results. And I really mean without expecting anything here. It's using distraction as a way of easing in creation back into your life naturally rather than forcing discipline, which typically doesn't work. And we'll talk a little bit about discipline in a little bit, but this precedes that. I want you to think about something. Someone who is entirely inspired by life. Everything in their life inspires them. When they wake up in the morning and they open the curtains to the sunlight, or they have their coffee, or they go outside and see nature, naturally that person is going to be equally as motivated to do anything and everything, right? And so if we think about it from this angle, it seems like motivation is more of a byproduct of inspiration, not the other way around. And so we should really be looking for inspiration, not motivation, because then motivation will just come naturally afterwards. The problem is, inspiration is a moving target, and if you've ever tried to force yourself to be inspired, you kind of know already that it's not something you can force. It's just something that sort of happens when you see something or hear something or experience something, and then you get that feeling of inspiration. And so the answer to this sort of paradox of motivation is a little bit another paradox with inspiration. We sort of need to look for inspiration without specifically looking for it. Or in other words, it kind of needs to find us without us expecting it, which is a little bit of a problem when we're looking for answers in this way. And so the only thing that we can really do in order to increase the odds of getting inspired is to just consistently show up. Just show up and show up again and show up again. It's sort of like trying to catch a train without showing up to the station, right? You're not gonna be able to get on that train if you're not there. And in this case, this train is one that doesn't really have a schedule, so we just need to always be there. Now, just saying show up is pretty vague and that doesn't really help. So we'll get into specific methods and ideologies later in the video, but it's sort of this idea in simpler terms that we need to set up a method or a sort of environment for us to find inspiration without pressure. I quickly realized how ridiculous it would be to do all of these shots and rotoscope them out manually. I would go insane. And so I realized there's something that I haven't bought before, even though I do all of these projects, that just makes sense. And so I got this, finally, a green screen. And this will save so much time in it. It was like 25 bucks or something like that. So we're gonna do that now. This is somewhat of a janky setup. I think it'll do. You know, it's a home setup, and especially for this project, it should be fine. The one that might be a little bit more of a challenge is that falling shot, the one that I'm using this as a reference. My idea here is to like lie down on this stool here and kind of just like flail around, and that also means looking like an idiot for this. So yeah, let's get this over with.
Oh my God, bro.
Oh, hell no, man. Get your ass.
All right, let's see how that turned out. Scrolling Pinterest or Instagram aimlessly looking for inspiration isn't really a solution. That's kind of just doom scrolling. But in my case, after feeling burned out from my previous project and just kind of not wanting to do anything, I let myself for a couple weeks just explore while observing myself as a sort of self-test, just to see how I react to things, being conscious of that. What I ended up finding is that I was still intrigued by creative visuals. Like when I was scrolling through Pinterest, I would find shot inspirations or, you know, things that I would save as like, hey, I could actually use that as a sort of inspiration for a shot in a future video without thinking about like, it needs to be this video, it needs to be the next thing that I'm doing. It was more just like, oh yeah, this is interesting and I'll use it later at some point. And that's how I even found Christoph's work in the first place. It just kind of showed up and it surprised me, and it hit me with a sort of feeling that I was not expecting at all in the first place. It was kind of like a, oh my God, wait, what if I were to bring these to life? And then it just kind of started snowballing from there. Like, hey, why don't I make this into a sequence? So my assumption that I was completely burned out and nothing would inspire me again was wrong. I was able to get inspired. I just needed to let myself have that happen naturally. Maybe I'll find something today, maybe I won't. I'll do what I can until I can't, and then repeat that the next day until something happens. Okay, so that's great and all, but I mentioned before discipline is still a part of this, and it definitely is. So where does it enter the mix? Discipline is present through everything. I mean, even just showing up, even just having the mindset that, hey, I'm gonna try and show up today is a form of discipline. There isn't a single medicine that works for everyone, right? There's no silver bullet that goes across the board for everyone. I can only speak on what helps me as a framework, which is to stop thinking of projects as one specific task. So it isn't make an animation, or it isn't climb a mountain, or it isn't cook a dish, right? Think about cooking a dish. There's a lot of smaller steps involved in that process. And so focusing on this grander scale, looking at the whole mountain as a whole, is enough to slow us down and stop us. At least for me, that's what ends up happening. So tricking myself into thinking of things as just specifically smaller tasks tends to work, even if it seems kind of ridiculous or silly. Even working on this video as an example. This one was a little bit harder to jump into, coming from a point of no motivation versus some previous videos that I've been more excited to get into in the past. And so I broke it down into smaller pieces. Creating this whole video, there's a lot that goes into it, but just writing one paragraph of a script is pretty simple. I mean, that doesn't take that much time. Or even simpler and even more ridiculous is like just taking the camera and putting it on a tripod. That takes like 2 minutes. And it sounds crazy, but once I do that, it's like, okay, I might as well do the next thing. I might as well sit down and talk for 10 minutes and see what happens. And 9 times out of 10, what ends up happening is I just kind of snowball my way into doing the whole thing, which then afterwards I'm like, oh, hey, that turned out pretty well. So using that sort of momentum to pick us up off of these silly, specific, tiny things actually ends up working pretty well most of the time. Typically just starting is the hardest part, but once you get the ball rolling and the momentum is going, it becomes a lot easier. Discipline is the step that maintains motivation. It's not beating yourself up and suffering through the whole process. It's just approaching it as every little stretch of path as you climb the mountain with that same open mind. A big part of all this is this need to prove that I can do a video like this, that I can make a final piece, that I can make a short film, whatever it may be. And in the pursuit of that need comes a lot of perfectionism. And in a lot of ways, that ends up putting up a lot of barriers for me. Anyway, what ends up happening is it slows down the process to a halt, and then I don't end up making anything. For me, that has been, I think, the biggest motivation killer in recent times. I just made a very produced, very big piece that was very personal to me that I put everything into. And so the follow-up piece feels like, how am I going to top that in terms of production quality? So yeah, this video in itself is a practice for me, resisting Not just the lack of motivation, but the resistances from perfectionism and wanting this to be something more than it needs to be. I know every single time a sponsor section comes up, it's instinct to skip. But before you do, I have a little story that relates to this very topic. About a year ago, I was in a very similar situation, just fully uninspired, nothing would spark my inspiration. But by chance, while working on a client project, I came across this song. And I thought, what would the visuals to this actually look like? And what ended up happening is I went down a rabbit hole, spending over a couple hundred hours for a 30-second animated sequence that then ended up becoming the blueprint for doing more creative projects on this channel. When I say I've been using Artlist as a source of inspiration for years, I really do mean it. Having the ability to explore seemingly endless sound effects and music has become an absolutely essential part to my workflow. What's so cool to see is that they keep adding new features. Like just recently they added stems for music so that you can mix your own tracks and remove and add different sections in how you see fit for your project. And just this month they added LUTs for color grading, which I'm a huge fan of because I recently got more into color grading. In previous videos, I've made collections of the sound effects from that specific project, but this time I decided to do something a little bit different, which is to make an artboard collection of my all-time favorite sounds. So you can check that out down below, along with the link to sign up for a plan that fits your specific needs. And if you use my link to sign up for an annual plan, you get 2 months for free. I highly recommend checking it out, especially if you're looking for a new source of inspiration. Thank you to Artlist, and let's get back into the video. What's left now is just completing the rest of the portrait shots, which is still a lot of work and a lot of processing, but it's essentially a straight shot because they're all pretty much the same, except for one of them. I'm referencing this piece from Christoph with the 2 heads, and what I want to try doing is having the head start in the middle and then kind of split into 2. It also reminds me a little bit of Junji Ito's Tomy, that very famous horror manga, and I actually wonder if Christoph was inspired by this, but regardless, it's what I'm using as inspiration, these 2 main pieces. So, time to shoot. I may have gotten carried away. I sat down to do the shots for the split head thing and ended up getting what I needed. And I thought, let me just test it to make sure that it's working. So I sat down and started working on the composite for it. And I ended up spending the next 11 hours just completing the shot from beginning to end. So now it's time to actually finish shooting this project. All right, let's get these last shots. As you can tell by this point, inspiration returned and its byproduct, motivation, was in full swing. But I had something on my calendar that forced a break. A short trip to Barcelona for one specific task. What this ended up doing for me though, changed the whole trajectory of this entire experiment. Wow, it is pouring rain. The reason I'm here is because I bought tickets to see the Marias months ago. And it just so happens to be that I'm seeing them in the middle of doing this project. Originally, I was just seeing it as a break and going to see Barcelona and seeing them perform, just kind of enjoy a few days off. But what ended up happening last night after the concert is a complete shift in my mentality around motivation and kind of the framing of this entire video, or at least where I'm going with both this project and the channel in general, and really just everything I want to keep doing moving forward. What I'm referring to here is my mental bucket list of things that I want to do in my career. And as of right now, the number 1 thing is working with music artists. Within the realm of wanting to work with music artists, the number 1 on that list is the Marias, and it's been like that for a few years now. I think it's important to have that sort of long-term goal. And you know, they're a big artist, right? That's a pretty ambitious thing to look forward to. But in my head, it's ambitious, yet not too ambitious that I can't reach it. Like, I really do believe that eventually with, you know, growing the channel and just continuing to develop as an artist, that is something that I could do, and that's something that I really want to keep working towards. Yeah, I think this was a very pleasant surprise, and it goes to show that inspiration shows up really when you least expect it. I mean, I was just expecting to go to the concert, have a good time, and go back home and continue with the project, but you know, this happened. So yeah, I know what I have to keep working towards. We often frame situations as binary choices. Yes or no, success or failure. I wrote this passage on my flight home from Barcelona, hoping for an email reply by the time I landed. It was another attempt to get in contact with the team at the Marias. But I had set expectations of winning or losing based on a potential response. That's wrong. What if there's a third possibility? An unexpected insight sparked by this very waiting, where the act of writing my thoughts becomes its own outcome. And here we are. Being in a state of no motivation is trying to decipher the world through methods that no longer work. It's possible that up to this point, those methods served a purpose, but all things come to an end. And so in my stubbornness to stay attached to the past, I've closed off the potential of ideas not yet considered. It shouldn't be just about doing or not doing. It should be acknowledging where I am and what options I'm neglecting to see. Resisting this is denying growth. Accepting this is the true first step to finding the remedy we've been looking for. The omens are out there for you to notice. If you choose to see them, you'll find that seeking motivation is no longer a relevant part of the search. The making of this video is a testament to this belief. What began as an attempt to drag myself out of a rut became a coincidentally timed journey that reminded me why I'm doing what I'm doing. And there are no coincidences. At least, I don't think so. So here I am, back home with an outlook that I couldn't have even imagined at the beginning of this project. In the last few days, I finished the animation, so there isn't much more to say except thank you for watching and enjoy the final piece.
If I could take her down a run, then I'd call her. 'Cause she's standing drama, she know I call her. She kidding on the sun and then she order. Imagine me, imagine she's my color.
I posted a version on Instagram if you want to stare at it looping. Also, while you're there, definitely check out Christoph and give him a follow. He absolutely deserves it. I have 2 quick announcements. The first is I finally launched a Patreon. I'm going to be posting exclusive tutorials and breakdowns for my videos, as well as providing some custom assets that you can use in your own projects. And it's just generally a good way to ask questions and support the channel at the same time. Finally, my editing and animation course Frame by Frame is closing its doors permanently. My brother and I decided to close this chapter, and so because of this, you have until January to purchase access. Once you have the content, you'll have access forever, but once we close the doors, we're not selling access anymore. We launched a scholarship program for this final stretch to give more people the chance to experience the course, so I'll leave a link below to that form to fill out, as well as the homepage where you can learn more about the course. All right, see you soon.